Welcome back to another episode of Living with FASD. And I am so excited today to return to the conversation about FASD service dogs. And today I am bringing to you not one, but two very special people. Jodee Kulp, who was talking about service dogs before with me, and Donnie Winokur, excuse me, the parent of the child who's now an adult, but the parent of the child who received the first FASD service dog. So today is going to be a phenomenal episode where we talk about all things service dogs, the good, the bad, the ugly, because it's not just taking your pet everywhere. There's a lot to it. And so, yeah, buckle up, enjoy the ride. And if this seems like something that you want for yourself or for your child, then be sure to check the show notes and we will have contact information for who you can reach out to and how you might go about seeing if a FASD service dog is going to be a good fit for you. All right, without any further ado, Jodee, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to introduce Donnie first because she is the new kid on the block for the podcast episode. So, Donnie, thank you so much for joining us here on Living with FASD. Tell me your story.
Wow, which part? It's a long story. So in 1999, Harvey, my husband, and I adopted two babies from Russia. They were 14 months old and 2 days apart. And they came back to Atlanta with us. And because they were adopted, we expected some developmental delays. So we put them through the ranks here in Atlanta in terms of what kind of support they needed. And Ayal was diagnosed with FAS when he was 4 years old, 4 and 4 months. And of course, those were just letters, meant absolutely nothing to us. And over time, it really became something. And the words now even are so full of impossibility and possibility. And as Ayal grew, we tried every medication we knew, every kind of therapy available, including aromatherapy, and nothing was helping him face his challenges. So I was pretty desperate after a while. What are we going to do for our kid? How are we going to help interpret the world to him and him to the world, and in a way that's going to make sense? So I started thinking about service dog, just out of desperation, basically. And for 2 years, I researched and looked and read and tried to find everything I could on how could a service dog help Ayal. And during that time, my husband became more and more resistant because all he could think about was the mayhem another being would bring to our household that was already a circus. But I decided to forge ahead without his approval, which was really scary for me. But I just thought I have to put Ayal first right now. So it turns out that Four Paws for Ability, which is in Xenia, Ohio, was the service dog service dog agency I landed on. They had started training assistance dogs for kids with autism. And I thought, I know there's some symptoms that are similar, but it's not autism. And we know that FASD can look like a lot of different things because it's misdiagnosed so often and undiagnosed. And it really presents an visibility to the person and the families, which of course adds to the stigma and
it's very isolating, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So I also thought having a service dog would be a little bit like a neon sign saying, oh, there's something going on with that kid. And the parents know because they got a service dog for this kid. And it also opened a door to conversation. And I didn't know that that would become the real learning experience for other people. So at the time, I connected with Kathy Mitchell, who was FASD United. At the time, it was No FAS. And she said, oh, you know who you should talk to? Jodee Kulp. And I said, Jodee Kulp? I read all her books at this point. That, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to talk to Jodee Kulp. Here's, here's her phone number. And I called and Jodee picked up the phone. And of course, she was sweet and understanding. And I thought, oh my God, she's real. And she became my Madonna at that point. So Jodee gets on a plane, meets me in Xenia, Ohio at Four Paws, becomes my partner because you have to have two people when you're training a service dog at Four Paws. You have your kid, yourself, and then another adult who can help supervise the kid when the adult is going through the training. So Jodee, and I teased her, by the second time she came to Four Paws for Ability, which the first time was in 2008. The second time was in 2015 when we got Quinn. And I wasn't well at the time. And Jodee was like my wife. I said, you are the best wife I could have, the best partner. Because I was really ill. And she, not only did she take care of Ayal, she helped Ayal write his book with her stylus on her iPad. This was just when iPads were kind of coming into being.
Yeah.
She helped him write a book that's now available on Amazon. So, you know, I can't say enough about how Jodee has influenced my life in so many ways.
So which book is it that she wrote, that Ayal wrote?
Oh my goodness, what's the name, Jodee? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but we can put it on the notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It was a while ago. But
He's done a number of things. So yeah.
Yeah. So I trust Jodee with every part of my being. Not just because she's a mom to my kids, but she's given me everything in the FASD world and in the service dog world. So I can't imagine more of a soulmate than she is. So this is really a fun and a poignant opportunity to do this with you, Patti.
It is my pleasure. So, because I also am very, very fond of Jodee. I think we've become BFFs since, the first time we interacted.
Yeah. She has that effect on people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when you know that God has brought people together, I think.
Right.
So.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Jodee, you just picked up and flew to Xenia.
No, I didn't. I did pick up and fly to Xenia. I had no money. I had just bought a ticket for my sister-in-law because she needed, I don't remember what it was, but I was going out to New Hampshire to be with her. And I thought, if I can get a stopover for cheap, then Donnie's got this. God, you got to do this for me if you want it. It's your decision. I got the stopover for $20. That was the decision.
Wow.
I could stop and get the go in and that was the beginning of, I guess Donnie and I are going to be together. So that was it. And meeting her family and especially her dad and I, he became my dad. And that was a really nice thing because my dad passed before hers did. And I really needed a dad for a while. And there he was right there for me. So it was really sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you're making me miss mine. Okay. So what was it like at Four Paws? What did you work on together? How trained was the dog when he was introduced? How trained was Chancer when he was introduced to you? And then years later for Quint.
Yeah, they actually do a really excellent job at Four Paws. They do the puppy raising. And Chancer was a little bit of a special item, but let's talk about the natural. Chancer was his own dog, and it was a second chance for Chancer, which is why his name was. But in general, they do the puppy raising. They do puppy, the right from the get-go of the best food for the mothers, nurturing, beginning training and enrichment right away for the puppies. And then when by the time they get to the family, these dogs have been in prison already. They've already been, so they're used to our kids, right? But they've been in prison. They've been one-on-one with someone living in a cell. And they've been trained in a group. They are ready to go home.
Okay.
And they are specifically trained for the disability that that Four Paws has, that the family has chosen, the partnering.
Yeah.
Donnie, you had to do something before that made that difference for them to train for IL. What did you have to provide to Four Paws?
This is pretty unique. They asked us to take video of IL in all different settings, like temple, doctor's office, store, library, anywhere in public. And they wanted to see everything, including the craziness, including the meltdowns, including the endearment. They just want to see everything. And then from that video, the trainers at Four Paws developed from the cues different interventions that would be beneficial to IL. And so he was 90% trained by the time we got to Four Paws. And that last 10% they call polishing. And that's really the connection between the client, the kid, and the dog. And the way their dogs were, because they had already heard your child's voice on the videotape, they connected so quickly with IL. It was unbelievable. And within the span of maybe 10 or 15 minutes, once the dog came out, they were like super glue. They just knew, like magnets, how to be together. And the dogs were trained for about 500 hours. So they were just, and that's a lot more than many other service dog agencies.
How old were most of the dogs at the time of their match?
I'd say a year and a half.
Okay. Yeah. So my the company I had gone through for my diabetic alert dog at the time, for the first several years the company was in business, they placed puppies because they believed in the power of that attachment, right? And they wanted the dog and the client to grow together. And for the child, if it's, obviously I wasn't a child, but for the child to be, to learn along with the dog what that would look like, because kids don't mimic the adult commands perfectly, right? So, and coming from the field of social work, I'm like, attachment, yeah.
Right.
And here comes this little thing at 14 weeks. And she was so tiny. She was so tiny that we had cats that were bigger than her. Standing up tall, she didn't even reach the seat of the chair in the kitchen. So, and I took her to work right away. She went to work with me and she was doing her job. But one of the funny things is, and I know we're going to probably weave some amusing service dog stories throughout the conversation, but the owner of the company was like, eggs are really good for their coat. You will give your dog an egg a day. It's like, okay, well, eggs, until dogs are used to them, also make them fart.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
And I'm not going to give one to her and not to my other three. So that meant eggs come with breakfast so that nobody's home to smell the other three farting. But it also meant at 10 o'clock every morning, like clockwork, Saley would start farting. And unfortunately, that's also the time where once a week we had staff meeting. And every now and then people would be like,
oh boy.
Life with
Can't
a service
take a
dog.
Can't take a dog out of a dog.
This is true.
Yeah. Anyway. So that is absolutely fantastic. And it sounds like a very reputable company. I know they've been around for a long time. They've been around a long time. Jodee, you work with service dogs for FASD for other clients. Do you always partner with Four Paws, or do you partner with other breeders and do the bulk yourself? Or do you train with other companies? How does that work?
So my program, Expanding Minds with Canines, is basically an enrichment program for the kids. I'm trying to build executive functioning. I never promise service dog ability, but I do have a strategy to get there. And if the dog has the propensity to become a service dog, after they've done everything they need to do, that's my secondary piece. My first piece is, what can I do to help the child? What can I do to help the relationship? How many, can we teach visualization? Can I help the child learn to plan? Can I give them the skills to go forward in their lives so that those things are available? Can they handle the dog? Yeah, they're going to learn dog handling skills. Is the dog capable of becoming a service dog? I take what I get.
Yeah.
So that means, some are farm dogs, some are dogs that have been raised by an incredible breeder. Some are rescue dogs from the Humane Society, and some are from the Indian reservations. So we have, a full selection of different dogs.
Yeah.
Probably in that group, and there's a big disparity on abilities of the people. So,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different, but everybody grows, everybody has fun, and it's always the third week where I start seeing really good changes.
Yeah.
And my program has its own program, but then they have to pass the AKC Canine Good Citizen, and they have to pass the community, and they have to pass the urban, and then they have to pass the public access test, even to get an ESA, which is an emotional support animal.
Yeah.
So that's what we go for. We go for the emotional support animal. If it looks like a good combination, and it's three people, it's the adult or the child, it's the family member that's taking on the responsibility, and it's the dog. So if those three seem to look like it's going to work, yeah, I'll move forward with it.
Yeah.
But it's not the same kind of program as an organization that just does service dogs.
Right.
It's really one-on-one. Well, and I mean, I've had up to 4 kids or 5 kids, 10-year-olds to 50-year-olds kid in my class at the same time. So it's kind of how it works.
One of the things that struck me, Jodee, when I came with Quinn to one of your dog training classes, is that you were actually having the kids train the dog, which was, I think, just wondrous, because that was a way that they could not only bond with the dog, but they were learning executive function.
Yeah.
In doing that, it just blew me away. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I think an example of this is I'll say to the kids, I'll say, okay, I need you to go find a corner in the store where it's quiet, and I need you to jazz up the dog. And the mothers and fathers are looking like, oh my gosh, they want the dog to get wild and crazy. And I said, and then you need to calm the dog down. And after a couple of times, all of a sudden you go walking around, everything's quiet and everybody's sleeping. The kids are in the corners and they're curled up with the dog. And they've obviously attained their goal right now. We don't leave them out of sight. That's not, the parents are stationed within reason to intervene, but the children don't, or the participants, the handlers don't often know that the other person is right near.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah. Very, very creative approach.
I am always out of the box. What can I say?
That's what I love about you, Jodee. All right. So you guys sent some pictures. Let me see if we can pull some up. And let's talk about them.
So Donnie, while she's pulling up the pictures, we can actually chat. I think the biggest thing we did with Quinn and with Chance, oh, there he is.
Quinn.
Yeah. So that's Quinn?
Yeah, that was during training.
Okay.
And he was like a year old there. I mean, he was he was a puppy. Now at Four Paws, they breed and raise their own dogs. I think they determined that doing the rescue dogs it was too hard to get them to be so fine-tuned.
Yeah. Well, and you don't know what you're getting. You don't know the dog's history.
Right.
You don't know their trauma triggers.
Or their genetic.
Yeah. Or their genetics, because it would be awful to go through all that training and have them die a year later from something congenital.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's very intense screening of the dogs.
Yeah. So tell me what we're looking at. What command is he following? Or was this just a time where everyone was taking a break?
I think this was probably resting time.
Okay.
If Quinn were doing over, he would be closer to Ayal's legs.
Okay.
Because that's where the calming sensory happens, at least for Ayal. And we could when Ayal was younger with Chancer, we could sort of organize him into a down. Ayal sitting on the floor, and then Chancer and or Quinn would come over, and you didn't even have to. Ideally, you don't want to have to even verbally give the commands.
Mm-hmm.
The dog instinctively knows, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do now because I see my kid is doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to, Chancer, who was 90 pounds at his thinnest, was able to go over on top of Ayal, and that just like heavy weighted vests or pads or other things that people use in kids for children with special ed, the dog was on top, and then there was really no place for Ayal to go. And it helped to regulate him. It calmed down
Yeah.
all the stuff that was going on in his head.
Yeah. So is that, Jodee, when the work that you've done is every dog trained differently for where they apply that deep pressure?
Every person needs something different. So you can't go in and decide that this is going to work for this family. A lot of times an OT may be involved and say, this they like it on their chest, or the child likes it on their legs, or the child or they don't want any pressure, or they want paws only, or they want the whole body of the dog over and the dog's head laying on the other side. That if you're using a nuzzle, it can look very different for each person. Yeah, for Chancer, and it feels lovely actually. He would practice hundreds of times with Ayal's. From the video, they would know what Ayal's behaviors were. When Chancer would see those behaviors, he would go and get that behavior of nuzzle. He would just do it. He'd know how to do it. And that's how they work with post-traumatic stress too, is you repeat it over and over and over again. And when that behavior happens, the dog is like,
I'm on it.
there. Yeah. Now, however, with some kids, repeating behaviors can be triggering. So, that's why I think 90% of the work with Chancer was done not with the child. So there's things I wouldn't do. I would have the family do it, or the mom do it without the child.
Well, let's look at this video and see if this is what you're talking about.
So we're practicing touch, and I would say Ayal is probably 17 here. And what's interesting is that because of the way Ayal was, when he was upset, he put his hands over his ears like this, and he'd walk around muttering and then maybe escalating to screaming a little bit. And that was the cue for Quinn to come and do touch. And that tapping Ayal on the chest like that disrupted or helped to start the de-escalation of where Ayal was. And because as Ayal grew, and at 17, this is what dysregulation looked like. The command was different. When Ayal was only 9, Chancer's nuzzle was, or touch nuzzle, they kind of became the same thing. The dysregulation was nuzzle, and Chancer's head would come up between and open up Ayal's arms, and he would start kissing and licking him. And all of that sensory and love helped to put Ayal in a better place.
Your thoughts, Jodee?
No, that's exactly how it works. And it changes. I mean, you think about a dog, and you have to generalize. So if as a child grows, the commands may change because a 10-year-old is maybe 4 foot something, and a 17-year-old can be 6'5", very different body shapes, but still the same relationship. Plus children and adults change who they are and how they manifest their reactions to behaviors as their brain develops. And kids with FASD have neuroplasticity, and their brains do develop, and we do make changes, and it's awesome.
Let's see if it will allow me to it only pulls up so many for me to look at any one time. Screen sharing has stopped. Okay, let's start it again.
So Donnie, let's share a story here while Patty's, oh, there he is. See, all I have to do is start talking, Patty, and it pops it up.
Yeah. So is this Chancer or is this
Chancer?
uh-huh.
Right. This was in 2008 is when we got Chancer, and I was 9 here. And I think this photo really does capture some of the intimacy between Chancer and Ayal. And Chancer was so attached to Ayal, and if Chancer were lying on his side, he'd probably be as long as Ayal at this point. He was a very big blonde
Yeah.
golden.
Goldens are large.
They can be very large, and this one was. So I think it just really shows the connection between the two. And if Chancer went over a little more, then his body would be over Ayal in
Yeah.
a larger way.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, what were you asking just before we brought this up, or what Jodee was saying? I don't remember now.
I'm sidetracked also.
So Donnie, you know, Chancer had we think about service dogs as being always on point. They are, you know, they are trained to such a point where things are looking really well. And I remember you and I going to New York City with Chancer, and we rode the subway and we rode the train, and we got on a bus, and we were at the Jarvik Center for hours and hours and days, and he had to work really hard because we were demonstrating who Chancer was. Even though we couldn't bring Ayal, we could bring Chancer. And then we got home. And what happened that day when we came home for hors d'oeuvres and washing our hands and taking care of, do you remember what Chancer did?
He somehow surreptitiously decided the appetizers were for him when no one was looking.
He worked hard. His vest was off. He was a dog.
They talk about putting the vest on, the halo effect, because when that vest goes on, they know they're working. It's especially because when the puppies are little babies, like weeks old, they put that vest on them at 4 paws anyway, these teeny little vests. So the dogs, it's like they become one with the service dog vest. So it's just a natural for them to then function as a service dog. Now with Chancer, he was a dog, and he was pretty predictable and dependable. We were at the Mom's Choice Awards booth because Nuzzle, was it what was that? Maybe it was
Nuzzle and Marasha, 2 books.
We went, 2 different times. So my dad was with Chancer at like far, far away at the end of where this huge amount of people was gathered to listen, and mostly to get a book signed. And so everything is going along fine. Then all of a sudden I hear a bark like coming out of nowhere. And I look up, and it was Chancer. There was nobody else that barked like that, but it was like, it was an enormous sound. He never really barked. So it was like thunder, basically. And I was like, oh no, Chancer barked. But that was, that was a subtle mishap in a way. But otherwise, the other part of the story in New York was getting on the bus on the way back, coming back after the expo. The bus driver decided he didn't want Chancer on the bus, which was illegal.
Yeah.
The public access includes the dog riding on any kind of vehicle. Yeah. And we had a confrontation, and they had to call another bus for us because this particular driver wasn't going to let us on. Yeah. But once we got on the next bus, Chancer was sitting next to me. He was so tall. He was probably 2 heads above me. And first people walked by, they didn't even notice. Like, oh, there's they just didn't even notice. They're New Yorkers. They have, an end goal.
Tunnel vision.
Right. But then somehow word got around that there was a dog on the bus. And then everybody was, they were doing this thing, and Chancer was huge. He was very well behaved, but he was just big. He took up his own seat. I do have to quickly talk about when I flew with Chancer back to Xenia for Forepaws for some additional training, which was fine. The attendant, the flight attendant, said to me, and of course Chancer was allowed. I got it. Didn't have to get an extra seat for him. I asked for what was the name? What's the
Bulkhead seating.
Yes, that. And on this particular flight, it didn't happen. They just didn't have it. So I had to squeeze 90-pound Chancer in front of me with regular people sitting there.
Yeah.
And there were actually 2 seniors. And when I went to the attendant, I said, is there a way I can move myself and the dog up to like first class or something? And she was really out of her nose was out of joint. She was not happy about the whole dog. Anyway, she said, you need to put that dog under the seat in front of you. Just thought, excuse me, this dog is not going to fit. So that began a whole drama there.
Mhm.
So then she comes back and she says, well, these 2 people, the seniors, she called them seniors, but these folks could move up there so that they had more room.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, what? So
Yeah.
anyway, I did have more room for Chancer there.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was, and in my memoir, I write about it because it was such a funny incident. It was like beyond,
Yeah.
it's like, is this really happening? It was
Yeah.
happening. But anyway,
my my favorite experience flying with Saley, which is Hebrew for my shadow, which is very appropriate for a black dog. But so she knows my target blood sugar range for 100 to 150, which is a very narrow range. And she's not happy if I'm beyond that in either direction. And if I'm not getting it into that range quickly enough, she will give me what I call the Darth Vader death stare.
uh-oh.
But I have learned whenever I fly to take a new bag, a full bag of dried fruit from the grocery store. And because it's it's very concentrated and very high, it'll raise your blood sugar pretty fast. Well, this was a nonstop flight from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Los Angeles. And so there's 5 hours of flyover country. And my sugar, she started alerting, and there was one person next to me. He was very curious about, what's this about and how does it work? And, kind of dubious that they would really smell, right, what your blood sugar levels are. And yeah, by the time all was said and done, I had the entire bag of dried fruit and about 5 glasses of orange juice. The stewardess even getting it for me during turbulence. And that's the only reason why they did not have to touch down and fly over country, or I would have been dead, because that's how much it took to keep me in range. And the only ones that knew better, the only ones that knew anything was wrong at all was the guy next to me and the stewardess. Nobody had a clue that their their travel plans were almost ruined.
Let alone
So,
yours.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, she was, and she would do things like, because their sense of smell is so refined. It's like we smell banana bread, they smell all the ingredients.
Right. Exactly.
So the technology is really good now. That's why she's retired and I haven't replaced her. The technology now, the pumps talk to the glucose monitors and adjust themselves. So I don't go out of range all that often anymore. But when I got her back in 2012, the tech it was starting to get there, but it really wasn't there. And she would know 40 minutes before the technology of the time could detect anything. And if I had to go somewhere, as social workers are always bebopping all over the place, she would refuse to get in the car. It's like, you can kill yourself, Mom, you're not taking me out.
Oh.
It's not happening. We're not going. Or
Mm.
she would sit down and plant herself. You know, one time we were walking amongst the giant sequoias, and you know, walking in hilly terrain tends to drop your blood sugar. And she's like, yeah, I'm not moving. We're done. You sit your butt down, Mom. And someone else had to go back to the car to get more sweets at that point. So yeah, they really are incredible partners.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just dogs, they're not just employees, they're life partners.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think building the trust is so, so important between the child or the adult
Yeah.
with the dog.
Yeah.
And in our training classes, we would see so many different kinds of service dogs, but and those who were trained as medical support dogs.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you were there, Jodee, but when we were getting Quinn, I remember particularly a girl who's maybe, I don't know at the time, maybe 9 or 10. She was in a specialized wheelchair, and she had several tubes connected to her with different things. And she was nonverbal, and she had probably was a golden service dog getting trained, and their connection was immediate.
Mhm.
And while Jeremy, the trainer at the time, was talking, I noticed at the corner of my eye that the young girl's, one of her tubes had disconnected and was on the floor. And I watched as the dog put the tube in his mouth and brought it back on the lap, and then alerted the mom or the dad about what had happened. And I was just, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. And to be able to, and of course, the seizure alert dogs are just so,
Mhm.
so important.
Yeah.
And now a parent could actually sleep through the night if they knew that the dog would alert that something was
Yeah.
going on with their child. How
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And also trains dogs to track. And so they can track their kid who might elope.
Yeah.
And I think it's up to an hour and a half the dogs can scent after their kids. So just the relief, the huge relief
Yeah.
that the parent can feel that, okay, this dog is on it,
Yeah.
and my kid's
Yeah.
not going to get lost.
I can tell you, parents being able to sleep through the night is golden.
Mm.
It's golden. From all my friends in the diabetic dog world,
Mhm.
it's the change within the whole family is tremendous. So how powerful it would be for a dog to both have that skill to interrupt the elopement, but then if the child does, you know, get rid of that connection, the physical connection between them, and manage to elope, then, you know, to be able to go after them. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
So how long was it after the fact that you started writing your book, Chancer?
Chancer was maybe in the back of my mind because Jodee and I had always talked about writing 3 books. My Invisible World, my daughter's book, Marasha, who wrote when she was 11 with Jodee's help. Then came Nuzzle. And then
I think there's the one.
yes, that's Marasha's book. And Jodee, of course, did the design as well of the cover. And the book won many, many awards, thankfully to Jodee, who knew where to send it to get reviewed.
Yeah.
And then came Nuzzle, and I think you have a picture of that as well.
I do. I want to
Coming
talk
up.
about this just for a little bit. So your daughter wrote this about what it's
Being
like
a
to be the
sibling.
sibling.
Right.
How many of the listeners and viewers of this podcast could really benefit from helping the siblings? Because it seems like sometimes having a special needs child, the siblings feel lost or forgotten, you know, like their sibling with the challenges just sucks up all the focus in the family.
Right.
So that's what she speaks to here.
Yeah, and I'm looking at her expression, and even her expression there, it's showing me something that I know that was true, was that she felt disconnected from the family
Mhm.
because it became the United Nations of IAL. Everything
Mhm.
was focused around him. And I have so much regret as a mom now that I couldn't give her more, that she was getting leftovers, because
Yeah.
so much of my world and my energy was focused towards Ayala, especially as he was young. We had to have him programmed every single minute, or he
Yeah.
would lose it. It was so hard for him not to have the structure and
Yeah.
always know what was coming next. So Marasha being the other one, really had an impact on her. And it's interesting because now as an adult, she's finding herself offering the book to other people. But when it first came out, she was sort of like, do I want to be known as the other of my brother?
Mhm.
And did I really tell the truth in the book about how hard it was? And
Mhm.
I don't it was not that it was sugar coated, but I think it was also kind of at the good end of the spectrum, when
Yeah.
the other end was really very, very difficult for her.
Yeah.
She couldn't have friends over because Ayala would be acting out. She
Yeah.
didn't want to be at somebody else's house. She wanted to be here with us. And she just
Yeah.
told me this recently at 25 years old.
Mhm.
So, and Aya was so worried that Chancer would love another child. He was very
Mhm.
insecure in his attachment with Chancer.
Mhm.
And if he saw a kid smile at Chancer, he'd get so upset because he thought for sure they were having a connection.
Yeah.
So there was lots of other things going with Ayal's insecurity, even though Chancer was his dog.
Mhm. Mhm. And that really is such a poignant thing, and something very important for parents to be mindful of. For families that decide to start providing foster care or to adopt, um, it's one thing to have a conversation with your kids about, hey, what do you think about this? But it's like the experience of becoming a foster parent or adoptive parent, it's not what you anticipate, right? And it's kind of like getting married. You think you know what married life is going to be like until you do it, and it's different.
Right.
And it's the same thing with adding in kids who have histories of trauma, who have histories of attachment disruption. There are so many wrinkles. Um, and the biological kids just have a tough time. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone from taking the plunge and doing that, because Lord knows we need loving families to wrap their arms around kids who have known more hardship than a person should ever. Um, but I'm really, really just kind of bowled over that your daughter would write that. And you mentioned that in Chancer, the memoir Chancer. And it just kind of went by the wayside. So I'm really glad you sent me that photo as well.
Thank you.
Um,
But then the other thing, I didn't really answer your question, which was, what was the impetus for me to write the memoir? That,
mhm.
I think, derived from an article that was written about our family. Thank you for showing that.
Yeah.
From Melissa Fay Green, who is an author here in Atlanta, who's a phenomenal journalist and author. There was a whole situation where we met, and she very spontaneously said, you know what? Would you be interested in if I wrote an article about you for the New York Times Magazine? And I just waited a beat. And I said,
Yeah.
I'd be very interested.
Yeah.
And that began this amazing relationship with Melissa. And over the course of maybe 12 or 13 months, we worked on the article. She wrote the article. It featured Chancer and
Mhm.
Ayal and our story. And the article became one of the top 10 articles that were shared and liked, I guess,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
year in 2012. So with that kind of global response that we got, I thought, man, this is a sounding board. This is my time
Yeah.
to tell the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And so that's what led to writing the book. And it was
Yeah.
probably about 4 years from the beginning to it actually being published
Yeah.
from the
So
start.
I do most of my reading on Audible. um, so my book Sip by Sip will be coming out on Audible at some point, I promise. But I listened to Chancer in, I don't know, it must have been September or October. And there were so many, I mean, and Saley had been retired for 2 or 3 years. And there were just so many pieces that were sentimental to me. Like, oh, I remember that kind of experience. I was resonating all over the place and just loving the story and catching the bug about how important service dogs could be for FASD. So I highly recommend folks getting that book. And then you had one other, let's see if I can pull it up. One other book. What is this one about?
Well, we've talked about Nuzzle, the command, which
Yes.
was the most important command for Chancer. And again, Jodee helped write this book as well. And she did the all the graphic design, as you can see on the cover here. And this is the one for kids. It's really a family book to look at and read. And in the back of the book, we have a photo album. Or is that, no, I'm sorry. That's actually in Mirash's book. There's the photo album of the kids. But this also, I think at the end of the book, did this have activities in the book, Jodee? Do you remember? Or what, did we do that separately?
We had activities on the website. So there were coloring sheets and activities that the siblings could do. We provided a number of things for families to work with and expand on this. But yeah, it's the earliest book that we have to read about FASD for our kids. It's a gentle story for people with FASD to learn about it, that it's not the end of the world. It's an okay thing. And for families to realize that it's not just, this family, it's many families. So
It's interesting in getting ready for this podcast. I noticed that in 2009, when we wrote Mirash's book, the stats were 1 in 100 live births had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Now it's 1 in 20, going from 1 in 100 in 2009 to here we are in 2024. I mean, look at that. And of course, there's just so many different reasons why the numbers are what they are, but it's so alarming and staggering. And I use that statistic a lot when I'm talking about FASD, because it's just, and that's what you want. You want that person to like drop everything and think, how come I don't know about this?
Yeah. And that's a huge topic for another show, because we're just about out of time. I knew today would disappear. But I so have enjoyed having you both on. And I hope that this really gets a lot of families thinking about, could this be an intervention that's right for me or for my child? Because service dogs are wonderful. And as we kind of alluded to humorously, they're not for everybody. And not all people have the right wherewithal to partner with an animal, because it's two-way communication. Anyone that wants to think about service dogs, I always recommend reading the book The Other End of the Leash, which is quite a good book, because the dogs, they can learn English words, right, or whatever the language is that someone speaks, but it's not the same as them being fluent in human language. And so just as we provide accommodations for our loved ones with FASD, we have to provide the accommodations for our canine partners by learning how dogs communicate. And
so Patti, let me interject one thing, because I think this is a barrier that people need to look at. These are not cheap dogs.
No.
You're looking at 15,000 and above for this dog.
I paid 20 for mine, and that was back in 2012.
And I mean, that's not what I do in my program, because I do training of people and kids. But in general, if you're going to get a service dog, that would be a low price, and that's probably subsidized by half for that service dog. What my recommendation is embrace your community. Get the community to get behind you so that this isn't just your child's service dog. This is the service dog of your village, of your town, of your area. And this service dog, you know, I helped get that service dog, the Lions Club says, and I helped get that service dog, the VFW says. And I helped get that service dog, says grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles and friends. And now it's no longer a burden. It's now a rejoicing opportunity for the community.
And dovetailing into that, I never liked public speaking, but I had to take that plunge in order to fundraise to get Saley, because I don't have $20,000 laying around in discretionary income. I don't have it. If I did, I wouldn't be working. But you know, the other thing that does, aside from alleviating the financial burden, is it gets awareness to the community on whatever you're seeking that service animal for. You know, there's a lot of people that learned a whole lot about type 1 diabetes that they had no clue about until I started fundraising for Saley.
Right.
And so it would be a great way of raising community awareness for FASD as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patti, so much for giving us this opportunity to share our friendship, our relationship, but how creative we could be a team, and to talk about our kids and how they can help teach others.
Yeah, it was my honor and pleasure to have you both on today. You know, service dogs and FASD are two of my passions. And yeah, it was a joy to have you both on. So we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
All right. So everybody, if you are curious about getting a service dog for your family or for yourself, please look at the show notes to see what information we have there for you to consider, or send your questions in to livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. And if I can't answer them, I will loop Jodee in and we'll see if we can't address your questions. And thank you for joining us today. Always such an honor to be coming to you every week and sharing about FASD. Do come back again next Monday for another episode, and have a great and blessed week. Bye-bye for now.